Risk is a funny thing. Some of us embrace it and some of us try to steer clear of it. But like it or not, very few things in life are risk-free. And of course, property is no exception. But honestly, I think some property people have totally unrealistic expectations when it comes to risk. So stick with me to the end of the video and I'll tell you everything you need to know. Now, for full transparency, on the risk scale I'm quite high up, near the risk-taking end. If the scale were 0 to 10, I guess I'd be about an 8.5, maybe even a 9, at least when it comes to money and finance. Not so much with physical activities, where I'd probably be a rather pathetic 3, but that's not the point. And again, for full transparency, not every risk I've taken has worked out. But surely that's the thing with risk. If things were guaranteed to work out, even when you took a risk, it'd be an oxymoron. Is that the right use of the word? If it was guaranteed to work out anyway, then there would be no risk. When you take a risk, you need to accept and understand that it might not work out. Anyway, this is something I've thought about a lot over the years. You may know that for many years I used to help out at a well-known property training company, helping to run one of their flagship property trainings, mainly aimed at beginners in property. Here's what I found from having been in training rooms with a combined total of more than 1,000 students. At almost every training, there was usually someone there, and quite often multiple someones, who wanted to learn about how to do property, but they were determined to do property on their own terms. And regularly, the non-negotiable term for them was, it has to be risk-free. So, during the breaks, or over lunch, or whatever, over the course of the weekend, there was a trickle of delegates who, in one way or another, said words to the effect of, "Are you going to show us how to do property so that I don't have to take any risks?" And if it wasn't them asking for themselves, it'd be a partner or a significant other saying something like, "I've let him or her come on this training, but only on the understanding that they won't end up taking any risk afterwards." I was remembering this the other day as I was listening to the audiobook version of How to Get Rich by the late Felix Denis. I'm only a couple of chapters in, but so far it's a delightful listen, very autobiographical in an interesting way, and not what I was expecting at all. Much better, in fact. And at one point he threw in this pearl of wisdom. The ability to live with and embrace risk is what sets apart the financial winners and losers in the world. No doubt if I'd quoted that at a training weekend, a minority of the delegates or their partners may have been very offended by the use of the L word. But, like it or not, Felix was really stating a simple truth. Because what those delegates didn't understand is that return, or returns, and I'm talking here principally in a financial sense, but it will equally apply to success in other non-financial areas of our lives, is the reward for taking risk. By the way, if you'd like to grab a copy of How to Get Rich for yourself, I'll leave a link in the description or somewhere around this video, depending upon where you're watching it. It's a great read or listen, and I thoroughly recommend it. And, full transparency, if you do use my link, I may earn a small commission at no extra cost to you. At a simplistic level, you cannot have reward if you have no risk, or, put another way, you will not get the reward of a return if you won't take risk. There has to be some risk. Even in property, which is considered one of the least risky of investments, assuming you do proper due diligence, and which is why banks are reasonably willing to lend against it, but they wouldn't lend against other, much more risky classes of investments. And that's why, although we moan about interest rates and mortgage rates, and I love a good moan about those, we know that interest rates charged by a bank for a mortgage are actually quite cheap in the scheme of things. At least when you compare what the interest rate would be if you tried to borrow money to buy another much more risky asset type. As I say this, I realise there's even more to this. Risk and reward are not linear. It doesn't follow that taking 50% more risk gives 50% more reward. Chances are that the 80-20 principle applies here, and a little more risk could create a disproportionately greater reward, or the converse is also true, that a larger amount of risk could produce just a smaller pro rata amount of reward. Anyway, that's probably a subject for another time, when I've been able to think and study and come to a proper conclusion. Going back to property, it does explain why so many people were disappointed when I taught them a fundamental truth about buy-to-let. In fact, this applies to most types of property. It would go something like this. Me. So you want to make income from property, a good income? Delegates. Yes. Me. Okay, so what's the best type of property for producing a good income? Delegates. A property with a good higher return? That's right. So what type of property is that? Blank faces. Me. Generally speaking, it's a cheaper property. Yes? Puzzled looks. Delegates. Why? Because the returns from a cheap property are higher. The rent as a proportion of the purchase price is higher, or, looked at another way, you pay less for that property to get that amount of rent. Delegates. Nodding of heads. Okay, I think I get that. Me. So cheaper properties give a better or higher return, at least in terms of rent, than more expensive properties. Delegates. Okay. Me. So here's a question. Why are they cheaper? Delegates. Because they're in cheaper areas? Me. Yes, okay, but why are those areas cheaper? Blank faces. Me. Surely it's simple supply and demand. Those properties are cheaper because not so many people want to buy them. Cheaper areas are areas where not so many people want to buy, for all sorts of reasons. Slightly concerned looks. Penny beginning to drop. Delegates. So you're saying the best returns are from properties which are cheaper, which means they're in not such nice areas? Doesn't that make them risky? Me. Yes and yes. At least somewhat riskier. You'll still do your due diligence and minimise your risk, hopefully. But yes, some people might see them as being riskier. Flash of annoyance. Delegates. But that's not what I want. I want high-priced, higher-quality properties in really nice, expensive locations that give me really high returns. And I want to get them at the same price as those cheap properties in the not-so-nice areas. And I want you to show me how I can do that. Okay, there's a bit of artistic license in that last scene, but I think you get the idea. There's often a complete misunderstanding, or a complete ignoring, of the fact that risk and return are inversely correlated. If you want the returns, you must be prepared to take the risks. What I ended up having to say, as gently as possible, was, look, if you don't want the risk, then be prepared not to get the returns. In fact, it might be the case that property, and maybe investing in general, just isn't for you. Because no matter which property you buy, there will always be some risk. Yes, as I said earlier, you can minimise risk, but you can never get rid of it altogether. And remember, the less risk, the smaller the return and the harder it might be to make your figures stack. To all intents and purposes, it's impossible to have completely risk-free investing. That certainly made them think. And if you're enjoying this video, then please don't forget to like, follow and subscribe. And please also come over to my website, thepropertyteacher.co.uk, that's thepropertyteacher.co.uk, where you'll find loads of resources, including free special reports, plus my very popular The Successful Property Investors Strategy Workshop, and the Successful Property Renovators Workshop.